Dan Joseph, a former Army combat engineer, joins us today on The Communicative Leader. Dan wrote a recent book linking leadership and resilience to mental health after having a soldier in his platoon attempt suicide. In his book, Dan educates leaders on the importance of proactively strengthening mental health and resilience for themselves and their team members. I learned a lot from Dan, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation too.
Hello and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah OH. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Dan, thank you for joining us today. Before we dive into the ins and outs, your view, experiences with leadership, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what brought you to this career and passion for leadership?
Yeah, definitely. So I was in the Army for 3.5 years. I was a combat engineer. And while I was in the military, I realized obviously the obvious importance of being a leader who has consideration for people's emotional well-being, their mental health. A lot of nuances when it comes to feeling states that may not be as explicitly discussed when we learn how to do things tactically, right? How to plan a mission set, how to execute out in the field. So it became very, especially working with combat veterans, I was impacted by the amount of weight that they carry that we're not often told about. Because people don't want to discuss this stuff in a professional environment, right? They don't want to talk about what is affecting them or hindering them or keeping them up at night. But I was able to grow really closely with these folks, these men and women who've been deployed all over the world and who've fought, who've gone through some crazy experiences. So as a leader who's sort of managing the everyday life in the military that we're doing, it was critical that I start paying careful attention to how they're operating and functioning, beyond the uniform.
Yeah, right. That idea of the whole person and that we're not working with robots. And honestly, sometimes I think we actually treat robots and technology with more care than we do with our human peers, right? Unfortunately. But I love that you are making that shift and we're seeing that shift in a larger way too. So Dan, a little bit about your background and this passion for leadership. And I know that you have some experience and you're really passionate, especially about resilience. Can you talk to us about this role you see resilience playing in leading?
Yeah, I mean, resilience, when I think about it as a leader, especially as a leader, what I see is that we need to foster it in other people and allow them to have that space that they need, and the tools that they need to downregulate their nervous systems, right? To offload and process stress. And that's not really discussed. We talk about bottling it up, compartmentalizing it. Society globally will self-medicate and dissociate. But it's rare for a leader to say, hey guys, hey team, you all need to take some time off, decompress. I want you to find ways to let the stress out, kind of remove that stigma of shame over it and just say, I mean, whatever it is people need to do based on their personality traits to enable that. That's how I felt compelled to foster resilience in soldiers that I worked with. And I needed to work on my own as well. It's like a practice what you preach kind of a thing. And so, I mean, how cool is that? I have to invest in my own self-care in order to promote that in the soldiers. So learning how to de-stress, learning how to, now we can talk about the specifics if you want, but there's so many tools out there that work. And so resilience isn't just kind of white knuckling it through the bad stuff. It's about the dynamic inflow and outflow of stress through our bodies.
I love that. Because I think that for so many of us, we're actually taught it is white knuckling it. Like you are being resilient. You are pushing through that pain, or what is it, like pain leaving the body. And instead of overriding that now, we're thinking about healthy ways to address it. So you mentioned some of these tools. Do you have one or two that are a nice, easy on-ramp that you kind of recommend offhand?
Totally. So one of them was given to us by, he's a colonel in the army, and talked about how he was in some crazy operations in Afghanistan, some very high stress events. Had such a sense of humor about him, but he's gone through some pretty intense stuff. But he told us to take bubble baths, and we thought it was a joke. We all just started roaring in laughter.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "No, check it out. I seriously want you guys to go home and take a bubble bath." And so what I do is I kind of adapted this to myself. I'll do a salt bath by candlelight. So
Mm-hmm.
that will allow me to, especially before bed, it'll allow my melatonin secretion, the production of my mind, my
Mm-hmm.
brain, to uptick before bed, because the frequency of a yellow candlelight is actually, it helps us get into sleep mode versus the blue light frequencies that we see in our technology, right? But I'll do a salt float as well, because the aromas are awesome. If anybody hasn't done a salt float, I highly recommend it. There's like a pina colada one, a lavender one. Oh, they're so good.
Yeah, I'm
But
signed up.
also, yeah, and then you feel, and especially if you're in the military and you ruck a lot, you're on your feet a lot, you got your boots on, and you're just going through rough terrain if you're in the army or Marines or whatever it is. But regardless, standing on your feet all day, you allow the blood to flow through your body, and you can do a body scan, a meditative
Mm-hmm.
head to toe scan on what's inflamed, what's injured, what's sore, what needs rest. And there's just kind of this checklist that we go through. And so I learned to do that. That's probably one of the more honest reads of my body, and I can get that feeling state pretty quickly, that assessment on what's going on. And then another thing I would do for self-care is stretching. So I know, especially for guys, we want to go to the gym and throw weights around and, get the stress out that way. But there's this special kind of feeling you get when you don't go work out in an aggressive manner, but you simply just let the tension kind of melt out of your body. Because there's a way of getting it forcefully out by lifting heavy things. I totally get that, and it's necessary. But when you do a stretch, again, you're able to go head to toe like a diagnostic and go through your body. And we can talk about this later if you want, but regarding like psychosomatic markers and memories stored within our bodies, you're able to get those feelings and those memories out, whether it's lower back pain or neck pain. You can think about what or who is influencing this part of my life that's causing this pain. And I mean, I can go really deep into like the existential, but stretching is a phenomenal way to zero out what's going on in the body.
Yeah, and I love that you hit on, especially if we're thinking of this as an on-ramp. Someone might say, like a bubble bath? Nope, not for me. But when you're thinking about the physiological as well, this idea of the melatonin and thinking about what yellow candlelight can do for sleep, and then you're bringing the pragmatic too. Like, you've worked really hard. You have stretched your body to limits, and taking this minute to check in and see what needs more attention, even if you're just using that as fuel to be better the next day and not necessarily in that moment looking at it as part of resilience building, it's kind of both, right? Like, we can sell it and frame it in ways, I think, that is going to be more widely acceptable than it would have been before, and we can tailor it in ways that will reach more.
Yeah, and one thing I would say, especially if there's anyone in the military listening to this who's like, oh, well, self-care, I don't know, kind of soft, it's kind of weak, or whatever it is. What's the irony of this? Especially people in the military, men and women in the military, would never say, oh, you maintaining your vehicle is weak. Maintaining your weapons is weak. Doing maintenance on something to keep it from breaking down, that's not weakness. You are investing in something to keep it going. Why aren't we doing that with our brains, with our bodies, with our minds, right? With our emotions? And I understand that again, it goes back to the stigma. It goes back to so much And I understand we don't want to talk about ambiguous feelings and something that's too touchy and feely, but this is where I like the hardcore neuroscience. Because if you look at the neurophysiology of the body, guess what? Every one of those soft, fluffy, warm, fuzzy feelings has a foundation that's rooted in our neurons, in the circuitry in our brain, the lobes of our brain. So we can do both. We can look at feeling states and we can look at the science. And so to me, the coolest thing is talking about meditation, but then also talking about functional MRIs, right? Because you can do both. And that's what I love about modern science is now we're kind of creating this holistic picture, and that's how we heal. It's body, mind, and soul. I mean, we're incredibly complex beings, and it's important to take care of ourselves on all fronts.
Yep, I see that we're moving away from this either or. Either you're doing this holistic or this very traditional medical, to both and. Like, let's look at all of this.
Yes.
Awesome. So, Dan, I want to ask you about your most recent book. I know you're working on another one now, and I'm going to email you to have you back on to talk about that in the future.
Thank you.
But today, Backpack to Rucksack, Insight into Leadership and Resilience from Military Experts. So in this book, you're connecting resilience, self-care, mental health. Talk to us about this connection. I know we've kind of hit on this, but how do all three of these kind of come into play, especially within that context that you're drawing from, that military context?
Well, I'll start with this. I had a soldier in my platoon, Cody. He actually wrote the introduction to the book. He survived his suicide attempt while I was platoon leader, and that is something that really changed my life. I spoke with his mother that day and promised her that we're going to get him help. And that's just not something you walk away from and think, oh, that was a close shave. Okay, let's just carry on with normal life. It's, there's a lot that got called into question in my own mind and my heart. And at the same time, I had a friend, Austin. He wrote the foreword to the book. He lost 13 men from his unit to suicide. And that is just it's so, I can say the number, but I can't even contemplate that. And seeing 13 people that are no longer here. And so I realized that this is a much more serious issue than I wanted to admit. And once it almost touched me personally with Cody, I realized I wanted to speak up, but I didn't want this to be an emotional vent. I didn't want it to be just me lost in my own feelings, because I have a tendency to do that. While I was in the military, I worked on my master's in psychology. So what I realized I could do is validate what I was going through with objective research, peer-reviewed journal citations, journal publications, and whatnot. And so I wrote a journal entry of my own to process almost losing Cody. And then I started writing another page and another page. And then I thought about, well, what did I do in my master's program? Okay, I would look up a research article related to this, whether it's suicidality, depression, leadership dynamics, whatever it is. And then I started stringing page after page together. And then this book it was a shotgun approach. It wasn't this, I make it sound organized. It was very disorganized at first. But then I created a common thread throughout, and then got an editor, and the book came to be. Now it's 400 pages long, and I apologize for that. I'm pretty long-winded, clearly. But what I love is the cross-disciplinary aspects of, again, resilience, mental health, leadership, and then the military, giving tactical orders. And the book is for anybody. It applies to any industry, But I just love how this is all interconnected. The stronger a teammate is, or a soldier is, or whoever, the stronger that unit becomes. It's not selfish. And I would tell my soldiers this, go get your college degree, go read books, go invest in your own psychological well-being, because the smarter and stronger you become, the stronger the unit and the military overall becomes. And I think having that perspective, it just really is shaping my motto, my kind of like philosophy as a leader.
Yeah, I love the focus on the collective functioning, because I think, especially in the US and in many industries, it's I, me, my, that individual achievement model, and it helps some, but it excludes most, right? And what does that do to the team? And then too, the collective output that's lost when we're chasing this old model. So I love that integration there. And I'm going to follow up on that. So we're thinking about resilience in the case of challenges. So you highlight the importance in your book, but you also provide some really pragmatic strategies to develop that mental strength, that adaptability. Can you share a couple of those strategies with us?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, jujitsu is powerful. I loved going, onto the mats, and basically, like, it was so important for me to get submitted and tapped out, and just, I responded well to that because there's this primal element of humbling my ego, and I had some ego defensive mechanisms that leaned more towards narcissism, superficiality, egocentricity. I had a lot of issues stemming from childhood that as an adult, I was still acting out. And jujitsu brought me back into my body. It allowed me to be in this primal tribal environment where we actually protected one another. So it wasn't about violence. It wasn't about hurting others. It was about throttling aggression and responding appropriately. And so that was something that really affected my ability to be resilient, because I would be thrown in the gauntlet with some of these people that I trained with, and it made life less intimidating. It took a lot of adrenaline and fear out of situations and allowed me to stay calm. And I learned through meditative practices about deep breathing. And so, again, going back to what we spoke about earlier, this is all tied together. So in jujitsu, when I panic or want to freak out, I'm getting choked out, somebody, this is getting bad, I would just start breathing, right? Belly breath, calm breathing. And then my prefrontal cortex would switch right back on, like, hey, you're okay. Think about the technique. Think about how to get out of this. What's the appropriate angle and amount of pressure? And again, these same philosophies on the mats in jiu-jitsu, we would apply to any relationship, any work environment. And it was just so cool. The philosophical approach of these things, whether it is deep breathing, whether it is jiu-jitsu for me, and then plethora of other practices. If we really pay attention to the core principles and the foundations on which we're building, it's so cool. It's a massive toolkit for us to work with.
Yeah, and I love that in your response, you talked about reflection. There's a lot of link between successful leaders. We can look at success in terms of their ability to promote wellness in their followers, in their paychecks, in their livelihood, in their ability to climb rank. But what we see is a common denominator is the fact that they're reflective, self-reflective, right? And not only, I have that blind spot, but what do I do now? Right? So making sure that it's not only acknowledgement, but also commitment to figuring out, how do I get better? How do I address this? And you integrated that so well into that response. So thanks for touching on that. Okay. So Dan, I think this is a fun question to think about. As an organizational scholar, I love to think about if more people were doing these kind of gold standard behaviors, what work life would look like and feel like. So with that in mind, what do you think organizations or work groups would look like if most title leaders practiced resilience and adaptability, and then B, they also praised employees for doing the same?
I mean, I think obviously it would be a much calmer environment. I think that goes without saying, because we all know what it's like to work with somebody who has that intrinsic ability to just self-regulate, and that we would see less, we would see less leadership using others to, whether it's get those ego strokes that they want, that they didn't get throughout life, maybe projecting emotions. So we could talk about projecting or transference as well. So just basically not being aware of what they're putting on others, right? We would see just a more objective criteria for the work environment. It's not about playing the politics and making certain people happy. It's about being healthy. And there's a dichotomy between happiness and healthiness sometimes, right? And so I think it would be so cool to have work environments in which people felt seen for who they were and the productivity they're giving rather than what loyalties they're creating. And again, we're human, so I understand that this is probably never, it's probably not going to be as clean as I would envision in my mind, but it's worth approaching that, right? It's worth leaning towards that. And one thing I would say is it's really important not to just be resilient, but to offer that to others. And what really I was thinking about the other day was how there were some people in my life who they had a different upbringing than I did. They had different options. They had different resources available to them. They knew what therapy was. They knew what counseling was. I didn't know that for so long. And what was so cool is when some friends came around me and said, hey, just want to let you know, you're worth having boundaries. You're allowed boundaries in life. You're allowed these, and they would drop these certain words that they learned in therapy, and it would blow my mind because I suddenly felt relieved. Like, hey, thank you for telling me that. And so I think people who are resilient, they've learned that resiliency from somewhere. And it's so important to not just hold on to that, but to give that gift to others, because it'd be selfish to just say, well, I can handle this. This person's losing their mind, but I can handle it. It's like, no, teach them about breath control. Teach them about objectivity. And again, especially as leaders and managers, to give those, not just have a sensing session, because I think a lot of people have sensing sessions nowadays, but then to say, let's equip ourselves with tools to handle these things. And again, different than just a PowerPoint checking this off, but let's go through actual pragmatic steps, because that's what helped me is like, give me the generalities. Okay. But can you please give me like a very dumbed down list on what I need to do? That really helped me heal.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I really I like so much of that. And I was thinking too, when you're talking about these workplaces, this idea of being seen, amazing, right? I think that's what most people like, I value you. This is why you're here. This is what you bring to the table. And our team wouldn't be the same without you. And that idea of boundaries, I think too, workplaces would feel less urgent. And there's this artificial urgency, I think that manic energy brings. And part of this is digital communication. There's so many layers, but I think if we're thinking about being adaptable, if we're thinking about resilience and we're praising these things, I think we can recognize not everything is a fire and stop treating it as such. And then I think too, have some, nice outcomes with our nervous system as a happy bonus.
Totally.
All right. So Dan, we've talked about all of these proactive outcomes that we can pursue and reap when we're thinking about mental health and resiliency, adaptability. But we know that we all have setbacks, right? They happen to the best of us. So from your experiences, from your research, from your book, what advice or recommendations do you have for us to help us bounce back?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the number one thing that I've learned about myself is take the shame out of it. Shame is just this, oh man, it's like this period of sitting there with feelings, but not moving anywhere with them. And there's just ambiguity of like everything is just bad. It's just miserable. Or I shouldn't have done that. Or there's no actionability there. And once I started minimizing that shame or removing it entirely, then I would think, okay, cool. I messed up because I'm human and every human messes up. Yep. What do I need to do to fix this? Whether it's I got to apologize to somebody, I need to stop the behavior and reorient and then head in the right direction. It's just like in land nav in the military. If you get knocked over, if you fall over a branch or a log, you got to pick yourself up, grab your compass. Okay, which way was I going? Grab your map. What's my destination? And then make sure I have all my items on me. And then start moving in that direction again, right? I mean, I face planted a lot during land nav. And that to me is just a perfect example of life. I mean, it'd be weird to not face plant. It'd be inhuman, right? We can't always live a highlight reel that, a social media just excerpt from our lives. I mean, we're going to have ups and downs.
Oh, yeah.
And again, going back to resiliency, that's resiliency isn't a static phenomenon. It's dynamic, right? It's elastic. There's movement and motion to it. Our life is not just a picture. It's a movie. And so understanding that each scene can change. There are bright moments, there are dark moments. But the biggest thing we can do for ourselves and for others is to just believe that, we're worthy of bettering ourselves and moving forward. But I personally have struggled a lot with that. A lot of being stuck, and that stuckness, again, there's no benefit to it. And so it's really important to find ways, to understand, where is this inner voice coming from? Where did I receive this shame messaging? And how is it holding me back? Who would I be for a minute if I didn't speak to myself this way? And it's just amazing to see all the options that light up.
Yeah, because it can be so debilitating, right? We can just have a paralysis there. To recap, I really love this advice. So for literal or figurative face plants, we can stop, reorient, regroup. So grab what we need literally or figuratively, and then move on.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah. That is so simple. I always think the best tips in life are the simplest ones because they're right? It gets to the essence of it. And then you're not stuck. So if you got stuck in the shame of literally falling, I mean, what's the alternative? You just sit and sit and sit.
Yep.
Right? We're not going to do that.
Which I've done that. I mean, I've done that in life, and it's like, come on, buddy, like, get up, like, let's go,
it's time.
So,
we're moving.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a couple more questions for you, Dan. So we know that much of your background is in the military. But what are some of these lessons or experiences that you had in that particular arena that you kind of coach others on or think about in everyday civilian life?
Man, I would say that we shouldn't be afraid to kind of love others and show love in our leadership style and the way we communicate. And I still struggle with this. I mean, this is something I'm trying to work on. It's not something we talk about a lot, especially in the military. But when you have these young men and women who are literally ready to die for an order you give as a leader, because they sign a contract and they sign away their life insurance at 18 years old sometimes, right? I joined at 32, by the way. That's, ancient compared to these youngins. But when you see these young service members willing to lay their life down for the job, to not show love in leadership is, to me, it's just such a cold approach. And I understand we have to treat service members like we're all replaceable. We learned that, that's how the military is structured. So if something happens and we're no longer here, people fall in right away into our position, and then the mission carries forward. But that doesn't mean that we should lead only with that in mind. And what I believe love does from a neurophysiological standpoint is, at a subconscious level, it alleviates stress that doesn't have to be there. Like you said, not everything's an urgency. Not everything has to be critical. It doesn't have to be about throwing the book at people. There needs to be, they say like the letter of the law and then the spirit of the law. I think there's a lot to be said for the intangibles of how we speak to others, whether it's the tone of our voice, the body language, eye contact, whatever we're feeling from another issue in life. Are we then projecting that in our current state? And again, I'm guilty of this totally. So it's super important for me to check myself and say, hey, it's not them. It's a me situation. And it's okay for me to feel whatever I'm feeling, whether it is tired, sick, miserable, but then to vocalize that, hey, just want to let you know, I'm going through something. I apologize. I'm not 100% right now. Just be patient with me. And, just if you have any questions about it, ask me. But my mood right now isn't because of you. I'm just going through something personal, right? I need to get better at that. And I would try to do that with my soldiers. So this is a piece of advice that works for any human being, because we're all going to go through ups and downs, and we have to show up to work. But while we're going through that, we can have grace for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and for others, and at the same time honor what we're going through. Honor that feeling state. Don't just
Mm-hmm.
repress it or self-medicate. Sorry, I can rant all day, clearly, so I'll stop.
No, you're all good. I love that, because like you said, we all get in these moods. We have off mornings, something's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't verbalize it, people around us, especially if we're in charge, they think maybe they did something or wonder what they did, right? So then all of a sudden they're carrying something they don't need to carry. So simply by vocalizing, this is 100% me, not you. I'm working through this. You're all good. I mean, it's 2-3 sentences, and we can take that away from them. We can role model that we are not perfect. We can have these conversations, and then we can move on with why we're there.
That's right. Note to self, I'm going to work on this, because I've been going through some stuff lately where it's been kind of impacting some of my personal relationships. And I think these people I'm thinking about know I was going through some stuff, but I just wish I did. And I wish I did better, and that's kind of why I wrote this book too, is I wish I led better, even, not to like beat myself up too much, which I tend to do. And I have one of my good friends, he's a mentor of mine who's been to war, right? I mean, he's been through some crazy stuff. He's lost friends in battle. And he told me, stop looking back and wondering the shoulda, woulda, couldas, right? There's a difference between just meandering down that alleyway and versus taking what did happen or did not happen and then leading better the next time around. So that's something I want to give others too. If you're like me in any way, where you can just get hung up on stuff, it's so important to give yourself that grace.
Yep. And even taking the time to circle back then. If you realize, I'm still carrying this. I wonder if they knew I'm going, send the email, send the text, make the call. And they probably do know, and that's okay. But then it's a gift you give yourself as well, right?
And yes. And you know what's cool about that? If those people in your life didn't have the language to speak about things the same way, you just taught them that. Because I'm pretty sure that's how I learned it, is when somebody apologized to me and I thought, oh, that's allowed? Like, we can do that? We can have this metacognitive discussion on feeling states and how that impacts. So,
cool. I'm in. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dan, I have 2 final questions for you. So on the Communicative Leader, we like to leave listeners with leadership or leadership communication tips. Very pragmatic. What can they do today that will actually help them to make their work life what they want it to be? So in that line, first question, tip or suggestion for our folks out there who are titled formal leaders?
Okay. I mean, if they're not already, definitely read books. And I would say not just read the book, but journal while you do, if you can. So pick something that really impacted you and stuck out to you, and Google it a little bit, look it up online, do the research, and then journal about it. Because there's probably something, just like when you listen to a song and there's that one lyric where you're just thinking, oh my gosh, you can cry to it or fight to it, or it just invoke that passion, that feeling in you about something. If there's something a leader drops in their book and it really resonates, start exploring that, tug on that thread. And what's so cool about that is multiple other books or ideas will stem from that. That's the whole journey of psychology that I realized about myself.
Yeah, and I love that idea of reading. I love reading. I love when other people read. I read all the time for work, but that idea of always staying curious then as well, and giving yourself the permission to explore those things that are really exciting. Okay, so our title leaders, we've taken care of them. What about our friends, our employees of all ranks?
Self-care, for sure. I would say, and look at self-care before you do it, before you go get a massage or go do some yoga or go skydive, whatever it is, surf. I don't, whatever self-care looks like to you. Really think about, how is your friend, your neighbor, your coworker, your whatever relationship, how is that going to improve because you do this? And I think that adds so much weight and validity to our self-care, because self-care is basically community care, because you're part of a community. And And I would really, again, going back to kind of the mindfulness approach, don't just do it because I'm stressed out, I need to de-stress, but think of it as, how am I going to be a better
Mhm.
XYZ to these folks, whatever it is,
Mhm.
because of your self-care. And I think just not applying too much pressure to the question, just doing that will invoke more spontaneous improvements in life, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Not
Mhm.
because I have a tendency to force things and just like, oh, I got to get really analytical. But when I just pause and breathe, answers come. And I think
Mhm.
that, again, self-care will do that. Your productivity will increase at work because you went and got that massage. Your phone
Mhm.
calls will be better. You'll smile more when you do your outreach and get more positive responses. Um, and oftentimes I got to remind myself of that. It's an investment in tomorrow. It's not just an investment in today.
Yeah, and I've never thought of it like that. Self-care is community care, and you're spot on, right? Because when we feel full, when we have our resources, we're able to be, better friends, better parents, better partners, better community leaders, all of those things. Yes, I love that. I'm going to continue with that tagline. Thank you, Dan Joseph.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan, thank you for joining us today on The Communicative Leader. I've really enjoyed our chat, and I know our listeners will as well.
This was so fun. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.